The wind in the high Montana lonesome did not howl. It screamed. It was a solid thing, a wall of white moving at rifle-shot speed, erasing the world. It had been screaming for 2 days. Eli Garrett felt it through his sheepskin coat, through his wool shirt, down to his bones. The cold was a predator, and it was stalking him. He kept his head down, the brim of his hat pulled low, his neck wrapped in a scarf that was already frozen stiff. He was 50 yards from his cabin, but he might as well have been 50 miles. The air was so thick with snow, he could not see the hand in front of his face. He was checking the stock. A fool's errand. Maybe. But he had to. His 3 horses and 2 milk cows were in the lean-to barn, but the small flock of sheep he kept for wool and meat were huddled in a crude shelter of pine boughs near the creek. If the snow drifted too high, it would bury them, or the wolves would come. He could hear them now, a high, thin howl that threaded itself through the bass roar of the wind. They were close. Eli was a reclusive man, scarred into solitude. The war had done its part, leaving memories of cannon smoke and frozen mud that woke him at night. Loneliness had done the rest. He had come to this high valley to get away from men and their greed, to live with the sharp, clean logic of the mountains, and the mountains were trying to kill him. He'd lost his way. He knew he was near the creek bank, but the whiteout had turned the landscape into a blind, churning void. He stopped, turning his back to the wind, trying to catch his breath. The ice clung to his beard. He was tired in a way that went deeper than muscle. It was then he saw it, a dark shape against the snow, a mound that should not have been there. It was near the base of a cottonwood, where the drift was already 6 feet deep. A calf, he thought. One of the sheep, strayed from the shelter. He pushed toward it, his legs sinking to the thigh with each step. The wind clawed at him, trying to pull him back. He reached the mound and brushed the snow away. It was not a sheep. It was a person. He fell to his knees, his hands moving with a desperate, grim efficiency. He found a shoulder, then a tangle of frozen hair. He pulled. The body was half buried, face down. He heaved, the air burning in his lungs, and rolled the figure over. It was a woman. Her eyes were closed. Her skin was a pale, waxy blue. Ice crystals matted her eyelashes. She was breathing. He could barely see the puff of vapor, but it was there, a shallow, shuddering gasp. The wolves howled again, closer this time. There was no thought, only action. Eli shrugged off his own exhaustion. He was a large man, built of hard winters and lean rations. He hooked his arms under her, one beneath her knees, one behind her back, and lifted. She was a dead weight, strangely light, as if the cold had already hollowed her out. He turned toward where he thought the cabin was. He had only the wind to guide him, keeping it at his left shoulder. He walked. He did not know if it was for 5 minutes or 20. Each step was a battle against the drift. The woman in his arms muttered something, a sliver of sound stolen by the storm. He held her tighter. He would not let the mountain have this one. Finally, his boot struck something hard. The woodpile. He nearly wept with relief. 10 more steps, and he was at the cabin door. He kicked it open with his boot and stumbled inside, the wind trying to follow him in. He slammed the door shut, and the world went suddenly, blessedly silent, save for the crackle of the embers in the hearth and the ragged sound of his own breathing. He carried her to the fire and laid her on the bearskin rug. For a moment, he just stood over her, breathing. Then, the training of hard living took over. She was dying of cold. He had to get the wet, frozen clothes off her. He did it with a clinical detachment. There was no room for modesty in survival. Her clothes were fine wool, but they were torn, shredded by branches or a fall. He used his hunting knife to cut the frozen laces of her boots and pull them from her numb feet. He slit the seams of her riding skirt and coat, peeling the icy layers away from her skin. She was stripped of everything. There were no papers in her pockets, no wallet, no saddlebags. Her speech was just incoherent whispers. She was nobody, a ghost delivered by the storm. He saw the bruises first, dark, ugly marks on her ribs and shoulder, as if she'd been thrown from a horse. There was a long, shallow cut on her temple, matted with frozen blood. He averted his eyes as he pulled a dry blanket around her, tucking it tight. He moved his own cot closer to the fire and lifted her onto it. He went to the stove, added wood to the embers, and put a pot of snow on to melt. He looked back at her. She was small without the bulk of her winter clothes. Her hair, as it thawed, was the color of dark honey. Around her neck, tucked inside the collar of her ruined shirt, was a single, small, gold locket. He had left it. It was the only thing she had. He gently picked it up. It was warm from her skin. On the front, engraved in flowing script, were two initials, C.H. He let it fall back against her chest. C.H., he said aloud. The name meant nothing to him. He brought a bowl of warm water and a clean rag. He sat on the stool beside the cot and began to clean the cut on her head. She did not stir. The blizzard trapped them. For 3 days, the world was nothing but the 4 log walls of Eli's cabin. The snow piled up against the single window, filtering the daylight into a dim, blue-gray gloom. The wind never stopped. It was a constant, low moan that vibrated in the logs. Eli fell into a rhythm. He tended to her. He fed her broth from the rabbit he'd snared before the storm, spooning it past her cracked lips. He kept the fire roaring, using up his precious seasoned wood. He spoke little, keeping a respectful but wary distance. She was a stranger, a woman. He had not shared a room with a woman in nearly a decade. He slept on the floor near the door, his rifle beside him. Not because he feared her, but because he feared the unknown. The West was full of people running from something, and they were often more dangerous than the weather. On the 3rd morning, she woke. Eli was sitting at his small table, cleaning his rifle, the pieces laid out on an oilcloth. He sensed the change before he heard it, a stillness. He looked up. Her eyes were open. They were a clear, sharp green. She was watching him. He stopped his work, his hands hovering over the rifle stock. "Where?" she whispered. Her voice was a dry rasp. "My cabin," Eli said. His own voice sounded loud in the small space. "Found you in the snow 3 days ago." She absorbed this. Her eyes moved, taking in the room, the rough-hewn table, the stone hearth, the drying herbs hanging from the rafters, the pelt-covered walls, and him. She looked at him with a quiet, unnerving calculation. "My horse?" "No horse," he said. "Just you." She closed her eyes for a moment, a flicker of pain crossing her features. When she opened them, the calculating look was back, mixed with a deep, primal curiosity. "Who are you?" she asked. "Eli Garrett. This is my land." He waited. He expected a name in return. She looked away, toward the fire. "Thank you for this." "You need to eat," he said, avoiding the unanswered question. He stood and ladled more broth into a tin cup. He held it out to her. She struggled to sit up, her face tight with pain from the bruises. He made no move to help her, letting her find her own strength. She took the cup in hands that trembled, but her grip was firm. She drank, her eyes never leaving him. "What should I call you?" he asked, his voice flat. She hesitated. He saw the flicker of a lie form in her eyes. "Sarah," she said. "My name is Sarah." Eli nodded, accepting the lie. It was her right. Out here, a name was something you owned, or something you shed. They settled into a strange, strained truce. The wilderness pressed in on them. The snow was so thick it acted as insulation, muffling all sound, creating a deep, heavy silence inside the cabin. The wind was a constant reminder of the death they had cheated. At night, the howling of the wolves seemed to be right outside the door, a hungry chorus from the edge of the tree line. Sarah was quiet, but she was not weak. He saw that quickly. She was guarded, watchful. She assessed his every move. When he brought in wood, she watched how he stacked it. When he cooked, she watched how he measured the coffee, the flour. She was learning him. And he learned that she was proud. She refused his help getting up, though he saw her wince. She insisted on mending the clothes he'd lent her, a plain wool shirt and breeches that were far too large, even though her fingers were stiff. Despite the tension, small acts of trust began to grow, like seedlings in frozen ground. On the fourth day, the wind died, but the snow still fell, thick and steady. The cold deepened. Charlotte, for her name was Charlotte, not Sarah, shivered by the fire, wrapped in blankets. Eli watched her for a moment. He got up, took his heaviest sheepskin coat from its peg, and walked over to her. She looked up, wary. As he approached, he did not say a word. He simply draped the heavy coat over her small shoulders. It enveloped her. The wool was rough against her chin. It smelled of pine smoke, horse and the cold, clean scent of the man himself. She pulled it tighter. "Thank you, Eli," she whispered. He just nodded and went back to his side of the room. The next day, it was her turn. He came in from the lean-to barn, stamping snow from his boots. He had been working on a frozen piece of tack, and the stiff leather and a slip of his knife had opened a cut across his knuckles. It was bleeding freely, and he was clumsy in his attempt to wrap it with one hand. She saw him struggling. She stood, the heavy coat falling from one shoulder. "Here!" It was not a request. It was a quiet command. He stopped, surprised by her tone. She walked to him, took the rag from his hand, and motioned to the stool. "Sit." He sat. She poured a bit of whiskey from his flask onto the rag, her movements economical and sure. He hissed as the alcohol hit the raw wound. "Hold still," she ordered, and she began to wrap his hand. Her touch was firm, not gentle, but precise. She had done this before. She tied the knot with a quick, efficient pull. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he asked, his voice rough. She paused, just for a second. "You learn all sorts of things when you have no one else to rely on." She met his gaze. "It's done." He looked at his hand, then back at her. This Sarah was not the simple, lost woman she pretended to be. He was more wary than ever. That night, the confinement began to wear on them. The silence was too heavy. The storm had broken, but the snow was so deep they were still prisoners. They sat by the fire, the only light in the cabin. Eli spoke first. He felt he had to, or the silence would choke them. "This land," he said, staring into the flames. "It's beautiful, but it don't love you back. It just is. It takes what it wants." She looked at him, her green eyes reflecting the fire. "It's taken from you." It was not a question. He nodded, the movement stiff. "My family, my younger brother, John, had a small ranch down in the valley. Good land, good water." He picked up a poker and jabbed at a log, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. "A rich outfit from the east wanted the water. Hale Ranch, they pushed. We pushed back. But they had more men, more money." He paused, the memory closing his throat. "One day, a dispute over a boundary line. It wasn't a dispute. It was an ambush. They shot him. My brother. He was 19. He set the poker down with a metallic clang. "My PA died of grief a year later. Ma followed. I sold what was left and came up here, where no one else wanted the land." He did not look at her. He had not told that story to anyone. He waited for her to speak. Charlotte felt a cold sickness in her stomach. Hale Ranch. The name hit her like a physical blow. She wanted to be sick. She had to say something. The lie came to her lips, easy and bitter. I'm a widow," she said, her voice soft. She hated herself for it, but she was trapped. My husband, Thomas, he was a miner in Colorado. There was a cave-in. She wove the story, using pieces of truth she knew from others. He was a good man, but he was gone. There was nothing left for me there. His family took what little we had. I was trying to get to Oregon. I had a cousin there. I sold my wedding ring to buy a horse. It gave out. I walked. Then the storm. It was a plausible, pathetic story. It made them equals in their grief. Eli finally looked at her. His eyes, which had been hard and flat, softened with a shared understanding. I'm sorry, Sarah. This is a hard country for anyone. Harder still for a woman alone. We all have our ghosts. Mr. Garrett, she said. Eli, he said. Eli? She looked away, back into the fire. But she was not seeing the flames. She was seeing the face of another man. Silas, her father's old foreman. A man with hands like worn leather and eyes as kind as a summer sky. He had been like a second father to her, teaching her to ride, to read the land, to understand the cattle. When her father died, the burden of the Hale Empire had fallen to her. She had been the one to order the expansion. She had been the one who signed the papers, eager to prove she was as strong as any man. Silas had warned her. Miss Charlotte, he'd said, his hat in his hands. This ain't just lines on a map. This is men's homes. Garrett's boy. He's a good lad. They ain't got much, but they work it hard. She had dismissed him. It is our water. Silas, the lawyers have said so. Secure the boundary. Silas had been the one to lead the armed men, and he had been the one brought back over his saddle, shot in the chest. Eli's brother had died, but so had Silas, a man who had trusted her, a man she had let die. She closed her eyes, the guilt of physical weight, heavier than the blizzard snow. This man, Eli, had saved her life, and she was the architect of his sorrow. That night, she could not sleep. The cabin was warm. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. Eli was asleep on his pallet by the door, a dark shape in the gloom. Then he began to talk. At first it was just a low moan, a name. John! John, get down! She sat up, her heart pounding. He thrashed, his hands clenching the blanket. No! Fire! God, the fire! Get water! He was not in Montana. He was somewhere else, somewhere with fire and smoke and screaming. He was back in the war. The whispers were sharp, desperate, full of a pain she could not comprehend. She watched him, her breath held. The reclusive, quiet man was gone, and in his place was a soldier, trapped in a nightmare. She saw the scars on his soul, laid bare in the darkness. Her caution, her calculation, it all fell away. She saw only a man who was as broken as she was. Slowly, she got off the cot. The floorboards were cold under her feet. She crept closer to him. He was still murmuring, his face tight with anguish. She reached out and pulled the rough wool blanket higher, tucking it around his shoulders. He settled, the frantic whispers fading into a low groan. Charlotte stood over him for a long time, watching him sleep. The man who had lost his brother, the man whose life she had ruined, and who, in turn, had just saved hers. The storm broke on the 6th day. It did not end, but rather, it collapsed. The wind died as if a hand had snuffed it, and the world was left in a state of profound, ringing silence. The sun, a pale disk, appeared in a sky of bruised lavender and gray. Eli stood at the door, looking out. The snow was a solid, sculpted thing, drifted 10 feet high against the north wall of the cabin. The landscape was unrecognizable, a smooth, white desert of waves and hollows. The air was so cold it felt thin, brittle. It's over, he said. Charlotte, still Sarah to him, came to stand beside him. She was dressed in his clothes, the wool breeches rolled up, the shirt hanging loose on her small frame. She had his heavy coat draped over her shoulders. She looked out at the blinding white. "I have to leave," she said. Her voice was flat. "Decided." Eli turned to look at her. Her face was still pale, the bruises on her cheek and jaw fading to a sickly yellow green. She was thin. The week of broth and biscuits had kept her alive, but not much more. "Leave?" he said. "And go where? There are no roads, there are no tracks. There is only that." He nodded at the endless expanse of snow. "You'll be dead in an hour." "I have people. They will be looking for me. I need to get to the main road. Someone will pass." "No one will pass. Not for a week, maybe more. Not until this melts or freezes hard enough to walk on." "I cannot stay here," she said, her voice tight. She was looking at his back, at the way the muscles moved under his shirt as he studied the sky. The thought of staying, of continuing this lie under his roof, was suddenly unbearable. The guilt was a physical thing, a stone in her gut. She had to get away from him, from the kindness he showed her, a kindness she had never deserved. "You're not strong enough," he said simply. "You don't know what I am." The words were sharper than she intended. His eyes met hers. "I know a weak horse when I see one, ma'am, and I know a person who ain't fit to travel. You're both." A spark of anger lit her eyes. It was the first real fire he'd seen in her. "I am not your concern. Mr. Garrett, you have saved my life, and I am in your debt. I will find a way to repay you, but I will not be your prisoner." He stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he stepped back from the door and gestured. "The barn is that way," he said, pointing to the roof of the lean-to, just visible over a drift. "My horse, Gideon, is in there. If you think you can saddle him, and if you think you can make it 2 steps, be my guest. But I won't be the one to come looking for your body a second time." He turned his back on her and went to the hearth, picking up the iron poker. He acted as if the matter was settled, as if she were already gone. Her pride stung. She clenched her jaw. Without a word, she grabbed his spare hat from a peg, jammed it on her head, and pushed the cabin door open. The cold was a slap. It stole her breath. The snow was light and powdery on top, but the drifts were deep. She plunged in, the snow coming past her knees. She fell, pushed herself up, and kept going. Each step was a monumental effort. The 20 yards to the barn felt like a mile. By the time she reached the door, her lungs were burning and her legs were shaking violently. She fumbled with the wooden latch, her fingers numb. Eli watched her from the cabin window. He had not moved from the hearth, but his eyes followed her every step. He saw her stumble. He saw her fight the snow. He saw her finally wrestling the barn door open and disappearing inside. He stayed put. He stoked the fire. Inside the barn, the air was warmer, thick with the animal scent of hay and horses. Eli's big bay horse, Gideon, watched her from his stall. His ears pricked. "Hello, boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. She found the saddle, a heavy western stock saddle, hanging on a wooden rack. She dragged it down. It was heavier than she expected. She hauled it toward the stall, her arms aching. She put her head against the horse's warm flank, catching her breath. The horse nudged her, smelling the salt of her skin. "It's all right," she murmured. "We're leaving. We're going home." She unfastened the stall door and slipped inside. Turning the horse, she tried to heave the saddle up. It was too much. Her arms gave out. The saddle thumped back to the dirt floor. "No!" she hissed, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. She bent, grabbed the horn and the cantle, and gathered all her strength. She heaved. The world went black at the edges. A sharp, dizzying pain shot through her bruised ribs. Her knees buckled. She did not fall. She collapsed, a marionette with its strings cut, the heavy saddle clattering beside her in the hay-strewn dirt. She lay there, gasping, the smell of manure and cold earth filling her nose. She had failed. She did not know how long she lay there. It might have been minutes, or only seconds. She heard the crunch of boots on the snow outside. The barn door cred. Eli filled the frame. He looked at her, lying in the dirt, and then at the horse, who was placidly munching hay, and at the saddle. He said nothing. He walked over, his steps slow and deliberate. He picked up the saddle, slung it over the stall rail, and then he bent down. He did not ask. He simply slid one arm under her back and the other under her knees, the same way he had lifted her from the snow. "I told you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Put me down," she whispered, her face burning with shame. She was too weak to even struggle. "No." He carried her out of the barn, back into the blinding white light. She turned her face against his chest, hiding from the sun. From his gaze, she could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart through the thick wool of his shirt. It was the most solid thing in the world. He carried her back to the cabin, kicked the door shut behind them, and deposited her not on the cot, but in his own chair by the fire. He stood over her, his shadow falling across her. "You will stay," he said. It was not a request. It was a statement of fact, as gentle and as unyielding as the mountain itself. "You will eat what I cook. You will sleep. When I say you are strong enough to ride, I will take you to town. Not before." She looked up at him, defeated. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, weary cold. She nodded. "Just once." "Good," he said. He turned, took his heavy coat from her shoulders, and hung it back on the peg. "Now, I'll make coffee." The dynamic shifted. Her failed escape had broken the tension of her lie, but it had also shattered her pride. She was, for the first time in her life, utterly powerless. And she was, for the first time in her life, completely safe. A new rhythm began. It was a rhythm of survival, but also of healing. The sharp edges of their personalities, the wariness and the calculation, began to wear smooth under the pressure of shared solitude. Eli would rise before dawn, his movements quiet, and start the fire. The scrape of the kindling, the whoosh of the first flame, became her morning alarm. He would make coffee, thick and black, and they would drink it in silence as the blue light of morning crept into the cabin. After, he would go out to tend the stock. She would watch him from the window, a solid, broad-shouldered figure moving through the snow, an axe in his hand. He started assigning her small tasks. "Peel these potatoes, knead this dough, mend this shirt." She did them without complaint. Her hands, soft from a life of ledgers and management, grew rough. She broke a fingernail, and then another. She found she did not care. One afternoon, he was splitting wood just outside the door. She watched him, the easy, powerful swing of the axe, the clean thwack as the logs burst apart. "Let me," she said, pulling on his spare gloves. He stopped, mid-swing, and looked at her. "You?" "I'm not made of glass." He shrugged and handed her the axe. It was heavy. She positioned a log, lifted the axe, and swung. She missed, the blade biting into the snow beside the block. "You're chopping air," he said, not unkindly. He stepped behind her. "Your feet are wrong. Stand here." He nudged her boot with his, "And you're all arms. Use your whole body. Let the axe do the work." He put his hands over hers on the handle. His palms were calloused, warm even in the cold. A strange jolt went through her, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She was acutely aware of his closeness, his chest at her back, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. "Like this," he said, his voice low. He guided her arms up, and then down. The axe hit the wood dead center, and the log split in two. "Oh," she said, surprised. Again. They worked together, his hands over hers, until she found the rhythm. He stepped back. "Now you." She swung. The log split. A small, unfamiliar feeling of satisfaction bloomed in her chest. She looked back at him, a tiny, genuine smile touching her lips. "I did it." He almost smiled back. His mouth twitched. "Keep at it. We need the wood." Slowly, they began to laugh. It started over small things, a mouse that ran across the floor, making her yelp and jump on the stool, the way his horse, Gideon, would try to lip the pockets of his coat, searching for an apple. They were small, shared moments that chipped away at the isolation. One evening, after a silent meal of rabbit stew, Eli did something that surprised her. He went to a small, dusty shelf above his cot and took down a book. Its cover was gone, its pages brown and soft with wear. He sat by the fire, opened it, and began to read aloud. His voice was rough, unpracticed, but steady. It was a book about a man living alone in the woods, by a pond. He read about the cold, and the beans he planted, and the silence. "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately," he read. His brow furrowed as he traced the words with his finger. Charlotte sat on the cot, her hands clasped around her knees, and just listened. The sound of his voice filled the cabin, a human anchor against the vast, cold silence of the mountains. It became a ritual. Every night, he would read a few pages. She learned to look forward to it, to the way he stumbled over the long words, and to the deep, quiet rumble of his voice. She was healing. The bruises faded. Her strength returned. But as her body healed, her guilt grew. She saw the way he lived. His life was bare, efficient, and achingly lonely. There was one cup, one plate, one chair. Everything had its place. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was soft. It was the life of a man who expected nothing more from the world than what he could take with his own 2 hands. One clear, cold afternoon, she went for a walk. Eli was checking his snare lines on the ridge. He had told her not to wander far. She stayed close to the cabin, just breathing the sharp, pine-scented air. She walked around to the back of the cabin, where the snow had been scoured thin by the wind, and she saw it. It was a simple wooden marker, driven into the frozen ground under a tall pine. The carving was rough, done with a knife. John Garrett, 1861 to 1880 gone. This was it, the grave, the brother, the 19-year-old boy shot down over a boundary line, her boundary line. She stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into her boots. The man who read Walden to her at night, the man who had gently corrected her swing with the axe, the man who had nightmares of fire and war. This was the heart of his loneliness, this small, frozen patch of ground. She felt a desperate, suffocating need to do something, to confess, to scream, to undo it all. She could do none of those. She turned, her movement stiff, and walked to the edge of the small clearing. She broke off several boughs from a young pine, the needles green and fragrant. She returned to the grave and, kneeling in the snow, laid the pine boughs at the base of the wooden marker. It was a useless gesture, an apology to a ghost. She asked no questions when Eli returned. She never mentioned the grave, but when he went out the next morning, he stopped by it. He saw the fresh green boughs against the snow. He touched them, his gloved hand gentle. He looked back at the cabin, at the wisp of smoke rising from the chimney, and his face was a mask of confusion. The spell of their isolation was broken 2 days later by the sound of bells. Eli was outside. Charlotte was kneading dough. She heard it first, a faint jingling sound, coming closer, then a man's voice, shouting, "Hello, the cabin! Hello!" She froze, her hands covered in flour. Eli burst through the door, his eyes wide with something she had not seen before, alarm. "Get in the cellar," he said, his voice a low, urgent command. "What? Who is it?" "It's Dawkins, a peddler. He knows everyone, talks too much. Go, now." She did not understand his urgency, but his panic was contagious. She ran to the trapdoor in the corner of the room, yanked it open, and scrambled down the short ladder into the darkness. It was a root cellar, cold and smelling of damp earth and potatoes. Eli slammed the trapdoor shut and threw the bearskin rug over it just as a knock sounded at the main door. She heard Eli's voice, low and gruff. "Dawkins, what are you doing up here? Thought you'd have better sense." "Garrett, good to see you, man. Sense don't fill the coin purse. The logging camp up on Boulder Creek is snowed in and paying double for tobacco and news." The voice was hearty, booming. The door creaked open. Charlotte sat in the dark, her heart pounding. She could hear their footsteps above her. "Just stopping to rest my mules." Dawkins said, "Lord, what a storm. Say, you got coffee on? I see 2 cups by the sink." Charlotte's breath caught. There was a pause. "My cup and a spare," Eli said, his voice tight. "A spare? Eli Garrett, you got company? Don't tell me you finally found a woman stubborn enough to live up here." The man laughed, a wheezing sound. "Just a visitor passed through before the storm." Eli lied. "A visitor, eh?" Dawkins was moving around. She heard him set his heavy pack down. "Well, that's good. Not right for a man to be so alone. Say, what's this?" She heard him pick something up. "That's just a book," Eli said. "I know it's a book, Garrett. But this ain't your hand. This is woman sewing." Charlotte's blood ran cold. He must have found the shirt she was mending. "Dawkins, what is it you want?" Eli's voice was hard, the friendliness gone. "Just passing the time. No need to get frosty. Man gets curious. You're a closed book, Eli. Always have been. A man gets to wondering what's in those pages." There was a tense silence. Charlotte held her breath. Then the merchant's voice changed, lowering. "Speaking of wonders, I come from Whitney Ridge. The whole town is in an uproar. You heard about Charlotte Hale?" Charlotte put a hand over her mouth. "Don't know the name," Eli said, his voice flat. "Don't know. Everyone knows the Hales. Biggest ranch in the territory. Old man Hale died last year. Turns out his daughter, Charlotte, has been running the place for years. Secret like. A woman. Can you beat it? Hard as nails. They say. Anyway, she's gone. Vanished." "Vanished?" "Like smoke. Went out to inspect her northern range 2 weeks ago. Her and 2 men, they found the men. One with a broken leg, the other frozen dead. But her, not a trace. Horse found with a lame foot, but no sign of Miss Hale. The foreman, Keller, he's got search parties out, offering a reward, $500. Eli was silent. Charlotte could picture his face, his eyes narrowing. $500, Dawkins repeated. "They figure she's dead. Wolf meat. A woman like that, alone in a storm. Shame. They say she was impressive. Not beautiful, mind you, but striking. Green eyes. Looked right through you." The silence from Eli was profound. "Well," Dawkins said, his cheer returning, "their loss is my gain. I suppose. Keller bought every shovel and blanket I had. You need anything? Eli? Got some new traps. Good steel." "No, I need nothing. You should go before the light fails." All right. Keep your secrets. Garrett?" The man sounded offended. He gathered his things. The door opened, letting in a rush of cold air. "You see anyone? You let him know about that reward." "I will." The door closed. Charlotte waited, her body rigid. She heard Eli walk to the window. She heard the faint jingle of the mule bells as Dawkins moved away. After a full 5 minutes, the trapdoor opened. Eli's face was dark, illuminated by the firelight. He looked down at her. "He's gone." She climbed the ladder, her legs unsteady. She was covered in dirt, flour still caked on her hands. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli did not look at her. He was staring into the fire, his jaw working. He had covered for her. He had seen her panic, and he had hidden her. No questions asked. And then he had heard that story. A missing woman, green eyes. She had to say something. She had to give him a piece of the truth. "Eli," she said, her voice shaking. He turned to her, his expression hard to read. "That man, he was right to be suspicious. I lied to you. My name isn't Sarah." Eli just watched her. He did not seem surprised. I am from a prominent family," she said, the words tasting like ash. "A family with enemies. People might be looking for me. Not all of them. Friendly. I was afraid. That's why I hid." It was the truth, but it was not the whole truth. Eli's face tightened. The word prominent hung in the air between them. It was a word he associated with power, with greed, with the Hale Ranch. His expression, which had been softening toward her for days, closed. His jaw set, and a coldness came back into his eyes. He thought of his brother, John, shot down by the men of a prominent family. He said nothing. He just nodded. A single, sharp dip of his chin. He turned his back to her and began to bank the fire for the night. The distance that had been closing between them was suddenly a chasm, wider and colder than the snow outside. That night, she could not sleep. She lay on the cot, listening to the silence. Eli was not reading. He was on his pallet, a rigid shape in the darkness. She had tried to build a bridge, and she had failed. The weather turned again. The deep cold broke, and a new, lighter snow began to fall. It was not a blizzard, but a gentle, persistent whisper, hushing the world all over again. The next evening, Eli came in from feeding the horses. He stamped the snow from his boots, his face ruddy from the cold. He pulled off his gloves, his movements stiff. The light snow clung to his hair and the dark wool of his shoulders, sparkling like diamonds in the firelight. He looked tired. The tension of the last 2 days had worn on him, on both of them. He walked past her to the fire, holding his hands out to the flames. She watched him. She saw the cut on his knuckles, the one she had bandaged. It was healing, but the skin was red and chapped. An impulse, sudden and overwhelming, moved her. She stood up from the chair. She walked to him. He heard her approach and tensed, but he did not turn. She reached out, her hand hesitating in the air between them. Then, she gently touched the back of his hand. He flinched, as if she had burned him. "You're frozen," she whispered. She took his hand in both of hers. His skin was rough, calloused, and icy cold. Hers were small, soft, and warm from the fire. She held his hand, rubbing it gently between her palms, trying to chafe the life back into it. It was an accidental intimacy, a simple act of warmth, but it lingered too long. Eli stood rigid, staring at their joined hands. He could feel the softness of her skin, the gentle pressure of her thumbs. He could smell the faint, clean scent of her, something like soap and the wood smoke in her hair. He had not been touched like this, with such simple, unthinking tenderness, in a decade. He turned his head slowly and looked at her. She was looking down at his hand, her dark eyelashes stark against her pale skin. Their eyes met. The air in the cabin became thick, heavy, the sound of the fire, the whisper of the snow outside. It all faded. There was only the space between them, charged with a new and dangerous energy. Under the same roof, beside a fire, desire stirred. It was a slow, aching pull, a recognition of loneliness in each other. It was the pull of a man and a woman who had been through a small war together and survived. Neither acted on it. He pulled his hand from hers, his movement jerky. "It's fine," he said, his voice hoarse. She stepped back, her face flushing. "The fire, it's getting low," she said, turning away, her heart hammering against her ribs. They did not speak again for the rest of the night, but both of them felt it. The thaw had come, and it was more dangerous than the ice. The quiet in the cabin was heavier than the snow. The morning after she had warmed his hand, the air was brittle, charged with the thing that had passed between them. They moved around the small space with a stiff, awkward courtesy, their eyes refusing to meet. He cleaned his rifle, his movements precise and angry. She folded the blankets on the cot, her hands trembling slightly. The silence was a lie, and the peddler's visit had poisoned it. Eli knew. She knew he knew, and his silence was an accusation. She could not bear it. She stopped, her hands clutching the wool blanket. "Eli!" The sound of his name, spoken in her true voice, made him stop. The rhythmic scrape of the oilcloth on the rifle barrel ceased. He did not look up. "You know who I am," she said. It was not a question. He set the rifle stock down. "I know what Dawkins said. A missing woman. Green eyes. My name is Charlotte." She took a breath, the confession tearing out of her. "Charlotte Hale. Of the Hale Ranch." He went perfectly still. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes, when they met hers, were not confused. They were dark, a deep, cold darkness she had not seen before, a darkness that eclipsed the quiet man who read by the fire. It was disbelief, followed by a slow, dawning comprehension that was terrible to watch. He stood up. He was a large man, and he seemed to fill the cabin, to suck the air from it. "Hale," he said. The name was iron. It was the sound of a nail being driven into a coffin. He remembered. Of course he remembered. His brother, the boundary line, the ambush. He looked at her face, still pale, at the hands that, despite their new calluses, were clearly not the hands of a working woman. He saw a daughter, a rich, careless visitor from the East, playing at ranching. He assumed she was just a visiting lady, far from the blood and the decisions. "So you are one of them," he said, his voice flat, dead. "It was my father's ranch," she said quickly, a flush of shame rising in her throat. I was away. I didn't know about—" "About what?" He cut her off, his voice rising, harsh. "About the men he hired? About the guns? About riding onto another man's claim and claiming the water?" "I didn't order any violence," she protested, and she felt a sudden, sharp resentment. He was looking at her as if she had pulled the trigger herself. I didn't know." "You did not know?" he repeated, scoffing. He took a step toward her, his face a mask of controlled fury. "That is the privilege of your name, isn't it, Miss Hale? You get to not know. You get to sit in your warm house while other men like my brother, freeze in their own blood." "That is not fair." "Fair?" he laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You talk to me about fair. My brother, John, 19 years old. He was mending a fence. His fence. Your father's men, Hale men, said he was trespassing. They shot him, 3 of them, on one boy, and they left him." He was closer now, his shadow falling over her. She did not back away. "That is what your name means up here, Miss Hale. It means power. It means blood. It means you can take whatever you want. And you who lie about your name, you come into my house, you eat my food, you touch my hand." His voice broke on the last words, thick with self-disgust. "I was running for my life," she cried, her own anger rising to meet his. "I was lost. You think I know nothing of loss? You think because my name is Hale I have not seen people die? You sit here in your mountain, judging the world, but you know nothing about me." "I know your name. It's all I need to know." "You are wrong." "Am I? Is my brother not dead? Is your ranch not the one that killed him?" She had no answer for that. The shame was suffocating. She knew her father. She knew how he ran things. He had been a hard man, a man who saw land as a map, not as homes. He had let the violence happen. He had called it clearing the way. And she had inherited it all. The land, the money, and the blood. She could not breathe. She could not stand in that room with his pure, righteous hatred. She turned, grabbed the heavy sheepskin coat from the peg, his coat, and wrenched the door open. "Charlotte!" he yelled after her. She ignored him. She ran out into the snow, slamming the door so hard the cabin logs vibrated. The cold was sharp, but her fury was hotter. She stalked away from the cabin, plunging through the deep drifts, her boots breaking the frozen crust. She did not know where she was going. She just had to get away from his eyes, away from the ghost of his brother. She marched toward the tree line, her breath pluming in front of her. He knows nothing, she thought, nothing. She reached the shadow of the pines and stopped, leaning against a trunk, her chest heaving. The silence of the woods settled around her. It was not the muffled, safe silence of the cabin. It was a cold, watchful silence. She heard a twig snap. She froze. She looked up, scanning the ridge above her. There, a shadow, and another. 4 of them, wolves. They were not howling. They were just standing there, dark shapes against the white snow, watching her. They were 100 yards away, but they were not afraid. They were patient. A cold that had nothing to do with the air washed over her. Her anger vanished, evaporated. She was not Charlotte Hale, owner of the largest ranch in the territory. She was a small woman, alone, in torn clothes, with no weapon. She was just meat. Slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She began to back away. She kept her eyes on the wolves. They did not move. They just watched. She turned and walked, as fast as she could without running, back through her own tracks. The cabin, which seconds before had been a prison, was now the only sanctuary in the world. She reached the door, her hand fumbling for the latch. She pushed it open and stumbled inside, slamming it shut. She leaned against the solid wood, her eyes closed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Eli was sitting at the table. He had not moved. His head was in his hands, his shoulders slumped. He looked up when she entered. The fire was gone from his eyes. All that was left was a vast, gray emptiness. He looked defeated. She slowly unbuttoned the coat, her fingers numb. She hung it on the peg. She walked to the cot and sat down, pulling a blanket around her. The argument was over, but nothing was settled. They sat in that suffocating silence for hours. The light in the cabin faded. The sun set. Neither of them moved to light the lamp. The only light came from the glowing embers in the hearth. Finally, Eli spoke. His voice was not angry. It was hollow, rough. "The snow," he said, staring into the coals. She waited. Her breath held. "John died in the snow. I wasn't here. I was away, at the war." He picked up a tin cup from the table, his hand unsteady. "I was in Tennessee. We were marching. It was cold. So cold. Colder than this. The mud froze to our boots. Then the snow started. It fell for 2 days. We were just boys. We hadn't eaten. We were pulling the cannons by hand because the mules had died." He was not talking to her. He was talking to the ghosts in the fire. "We made a stand at a creek. The smoke was so thick, you couldn't see. You just heard the screaming. You fired into the white. I watched my friend, Samuel, get hit. He fell. We couldn't get to him. We had to fall back." He paused, swallowing. "I found him the next morning, after he had frozen to the ground. His eyes were open. He had ice in his beard. He looked surprised." Charlotte closed her own eyes, a sharp pain in her chest. "I never meant to stay alive," he whispered. The confession was so quiet, she almost missed it. "You see things like that. You watch men die for nothing. You stop caring. You just want it to be over. You want the noise to stop. But it ended. And I was still there. I don't know why. I should have been there. In the mud. With them. He finally turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were raw, stripped of all pretense. I came back here. Thought I could get away from it. And my PA told me about John. They put him in the ground. Right out there. I wasn't here for him either. I wasn't here for any of them. She listened. She listened to the shape of his grief, the vast, hollow place where his family and his friends had been. Her own resentment, her own pride, felt small, petty. She saw the man, not the name. She saw the soldier who had never come home. Even though he was sitting right in front of her, her heart ached. Slowly, she rose from the cot. She crossed the small, dark space. He watched her, his expression wary, confused. She did not stop. She knelt on the bearskin rug in front of his chair. "Charlotte," he whispered, a warning. She did not say, "I'm sorry." The words were useless. Instead, she reached up, her hand trembling, and laid it against his cheek. His skin was rough with stubble and wet. He was weeping silently. He flinched, then leaned into her touch, a low, broken sound coming from his chest. He closed his eyes. And then he kissed her. Or perhaps she kissed him. It was impossible to tell. It was not gentle. It was not tender. It was desperate. A raw, clumsy collision of two people who were starved. It was a release of all the things they could not say. It was the argument, and the snow, and the wolves. It was the fear of dying, and the guilt of living. His lips were hard, chapped, tasting of salt and coffee and a loneliness so deep it frightened her. His arm snaked around her waist, pulling her from her knees. Hard against him, she gasped, her hands tangling in his thick, unkempt hair. He kissed her like a man drowning, holding on to the only solid thing in a frozen, churning sea. It was too much. It was too fast. They broke apart, pulling back, breathless. They stared at each other in the dim red light of the embers. Their faces were inches apart. They were both breathing hard. They were afraid. They had crossed a boundary. They had lit a fire that they had no idea how to control. Eli was the first to move. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. He turned his back to her, running a hand through his hair. You should get some sleep," he said, his voice ragged. Charlotte was still kneeling, her lips tingling, her body shaking. She rose slowly, her legs unsteady. She went back to the cot. She pulled the blanket up to her chin, but she knew she would not sleep. She lay awake for hours, listening to the sound of his breathing from his pallet by the door. He was turned away from her. The cabin was dark. The fire was just a bed of red eyes in the blackness. Her mind was a storm. The Hale name, the death of his brother, the confession of the soldier, the terrifying, hungry kiss. She reached for the locket at her throat. Her fingers found the familiar, cool gold. She clutched it. She pulled it out and opened it, though she could not see the miniature portrait inside. She knew it by heart, the face of a 7-year-old boy, with laughing eyes and a missing front tooth. "James," she whispered into the darkness. Her brother, her little brother. She had been 14. The fever had come in the middle of a winter rain, a freezing, driving storm. The doctor in Whitney Ridge, the only one for 100 miles, had been playing cards at the saloon. He had refused to ride out, not for a child's fever, not in that rain, not even for the Hale money. By morning, James was gone. She closed her eyes, clutching the locket so tightly the edges bit into her palm. She understood Eli's rage. She understood the profound, howling helplessness of watching someone die. The world had taken from her. Too, it had taken, and it had taken, and it had left her with nothing but a name, a fortune, and a cold, empty house. She lay there, awake, until the first gray light of dawn touched the snow-covered window. She heard Eli move. He did not rebuild the fire. He was pulling on his boots, his movements quiet, efficient. She sat up. The cabin was freezing. He was standing by the door, his sheepskin coat on, his hat in his hand. He was packing jerky and hardtack into a leather satchel. "Eli?" He did not look at her. He finished tying the satchel. "The snow has a crust. It'll hold a horse, if we're careful. I am taking you to town." It was the only thing left to do. They could not stay here. They could not go back. Charlotte nodded, her throat tight. "I will be ready." They saddled the horses in the brittle morning silence. The kiss from the night before was a ghost in the air between them, a thing neither would name. Eli moved with a grim, contained energy, checking the cinch on his bay. Gideon, with a sharp pull, then throwing the lighter saddle onto his calmer mare. Bess. He had not slept. He had watched the embers die, and he had felt the presence of the woman on the cot, her breathing soft in the darkness. Charlotte packed her few borrowed things, the mended shirt, the wool socks. She was returning to her world, and he was sending her there. The cabin felt impossibly small, charged with their shared breath, their shared fears. "The crust will hold," Eli said, his back to her. "But stay close. She'll follow my tracks." He gave her the reins, and his hands brushed hers. They both flinched and pulled away. They rode out. The world was a blinding, sculpted white. The storm had carved the snow into fantastic drifts and hollows, all frozen solid under a brilliant, heartless blue sky. It was beautiful, and it was deadly. Eli rode ahead, his rifle in its scabbard, his shoulders set against her, against the memory of the night. Charlotte followed, the mare picking her way carefully. She watched his back, the broad, solid set of him, the way he moved with the horse as one animal. This man had saved her life. He had seen her at her lowest. He had held her hand, and he had kissed her with a desperate, hungry grief. And he was the man whose family her own had destroyed. She felt like she was being torn in two. The lies were gone, but the truth was a chasm they could not cross. They rode for 2 hours. The only sound, the crunch of the horses' hooves on the frozen crust and the jingle of the harnesses. They were descending from the high lonesome, following the creek bed as it widened into a canyon. This was the way to Whitney Ridge. They rounded a sharp bend, the canyon walls rising high and red on either side, and Eli reined in so fast that Gideon tossed his head in protest. Ahead, blocking the narrow pass, were 2 riders. They were Hale men. She knew it instantly. They wore the dark, fleece-lined coats of the Hale Ranch, and they sat their horses with the easy, armed arrogance of men who knew they owned the valley. Eli's hand dropped to the rifle still in its scabbard. He instinctively kneed Gideon forward, placing his horse partially between Charlotte and the riders. The men watched them approach. Their eyes narrowed. They saw a rough-looking mountain man, armed, and a small figure behind him, bundled in an oversized coat and a man's hat, her face hidden. "Hold up there, friend!" the first rider called out. His name was Davies. He was a decent man, but loyal. Eli stopped. "Mornin'," he said, his voice a low, flat warning. "Where you headed?" Davies asked. His eyes flicked to Charlotte, then back to Eli. "Town," Eli said. "Just passing through." "That's so?" The second rider, a younger man named Pike, nudged his horse forward. "Who you got with you? She looks unwell. There's a reward out for a missing woman." Davies squinted, his gaze hardening. "Wait a minute. I know you. You're Garrett, from that claim up on the ridge. The one who... You got a grudge against the Hale Ranch?" His hand moved, resting on the butt of his own holstered pistol. "What are you doing with her?" Eli's body went rigid. "She's with me. We're heading to town. Stand aside." "I don't think so," Davies said, pulling his horse to block the path completely. "We'll just see who's under that hat." This was it. Charlotte saw Eli's knuckles go white on his reins. She saw the stubborn, dangerous set of his jaw. He was going to protect her. He was going to start a fight with her own men, for her. It was all going to collapse into violence, just like it had with his brother. She could not let that happen. "Mr. Davies." Her voice cut through the cold air. It was not Sarah's voice. It was not the voice that had argued with Eli. It was a new voice, cold, clear, and sharp as ice. The men froze. Charlotte pushed Bess forward, moving past Eli's protective stance. She reached up and pulled off the hat. Her dark hair tangled from a week in the cabin, tumbling loose. She met Davies's gaze. His jaw dropped. His face went pale with disbelief. Miss Hale?" Pike let out a choked sound. "Stand down," Charlotte commanded. Her voice did not shake. It was the voice of a woman who had run an empire, the voice of the Hale. "Both of you." "Miss Hale, but your clothes," Davies stammered, his eyes wide, taking in Eli's oversized coat, the ragged breeches. "This man, we thought—" "This man saved my life," she said, her voice cutting him off. "He found me in the storm when I was left for dead. You will go back to the ranch. You will tell Mr. Keller that I'm alive, and that I will be there within the hour." "Yes, ma'am," Davies said, his training taking over. He was already turning his horse, his face flushed with embarrassment. "And Davies," she called. He stopped. "This man is under my protection. He is to be treated as my guest. Is that understood?" Davies looked at Eli, his expression a mix of confusion and newfound respect. "Yes, ma'am. Understood." The two men wheeled their horses and galloped away, their haste kicking up a spray of frozen snow. A profound silence descended. Charlotte let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. She turned to Eli. He had not moved. He was just staring at her. His face, which had been a mask of protective fury, was now utterly blank. It was as if a heavy iron door had slammed shut behind his eyes. In that instant, he saw the truth. She was not just Hale's daughter. She was not a visitor, not a runaway, not a peripheral figure in his family's tragedy. She was the Hale. The one who gave the orders, the one who said stand down, the one who owned the men, the guns, the land. The power she had hidden from him was real, absolute. The woman he had kissed, the woman he had held, the woman he had just protected. She was the one. She was the enemy. He said nothing. He turned Gideon's head, his movement stiff, and kicked the horse into a walk. "Eli," she said, her voice small again. He stopped, but he did not look back at her. "Please," she said, her throat tight. "Come to the ranch. With me. Let me. I have to explain. Please." He sat there for a long moment, his back a rigid wall. The silence stretched. Finally, he spoke, his voice flat and dead. "Fine." He rode on, leaving her to follow in his cold, sharp tracks. The Hale estate was not a ranch house. It was a fortress, a 2-story statement of timber and river stone and glass, built to dominate the valley. It had gates. It had a long, winding drive. It was everything Eli Garrett had spent his life despising. Power made manifest. A monument to the greed that had cost him his brother. As they approached, the place erupted. Servants, stable hands, maids in gray uniforms came running from the house, from the barns. "It's her! It's Miss Hale!" "She's alive! Thank the Lord!" They surrounded Charlotte's horse, weeping with relief, and in a moment, she was transformed. She was no longer the woman in his coat, her hands chapped from splitting wood. She was Miss Hale, her voice calm and assured, giving orders. "Mary, draw a bath. Thomas, tell Mr. Keller I wish to see him in my study, and see to Mr. Garrett's horse. He is my guest." Eli sat on Gideon, stiff and out of place. He was a relic from another world, a piece of the harsh, wild mountain dropped into this civilized, wealthy cage. He was covered in dust, his sheepskin coat worn, his boots caked with snow. The servants looked at him with wary curiosity. A man came striding from the house. He was older, in his 50s, with iron-gray hair and a face that looked carved from hard wood. His eyes were cold and assessing. This was Keller, the foreman, the man who had been loyal to her father. "Miss Hale," he said, his voice gruff with relief. He gripped her hand. "We had given you up." "I am fine, Keller, thanks to Mr. Garrett." Keller's eyes turned to Eli. He sized him up in one long, cold look. He saw the mountain man. He saw the name, Garrett. He knew that name. He knew the grudge. His relief curdled into suspicion. He did not like this. He did not like this lone wolf being the one to bring her back. What did he want? What had he said to her? "The ranch is in your debt, Mr. Garrett," Keller said, his tone perfectly formal. It carried no warmth. "I need no debt," Eli said, swinging down from his horse. He felt the man's resentment like a physical force. "Please, Eli," Charlotte said, her hand on his arm. He flinched at her touch. "Inside, just talk to me." He let her lead him into the house. The great hall was vast, with a stone fireplace big enough to stand in. Antler chandeliers hung from a 30-foot ceiling. Eli stood in the middle of the plush rug, his hat clutched in his hands. Looking trapped, he would rather have faced a dozen wolves. Charlotte disappeared and returned minutes later in a silk dressing gown, her hair brushed, her face washed. She was the lady of the manor. She was a stranger. She led him into her study. It was a room of dark wood, leather-bound books and maps on the walls, maps of her land, his land. He stood by the cold fireplace, refusing to sit. "Eli," she began, her voice soft, "I don't know how to thank you. I told you, I don't want your thanks." "I know." She took a breath, bracing herself. "What I said in the cabin, about my father, it wasn't the whole truth. He let the violence happen. I know he did. I know he looked the other way." Eli said nothing. He just stared at the map on the wall, at the line that marked his old claim. "I want to fix what my family broke," she said, her voice stronger. "I want to make it right, for you, for your brother." His eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "The land," she said, her voice rushing. "The valley section, the 1,000 acres that belong to your family. It's mine. I want to give it to you. Clear title. It's yours. As compensation." He went rigid. The word hung in the air, ugly and small. "Compensation," he repeated. His voice was dangerously quiet. He turned to look at her. His face, which had been closed, now flooded with a dark, insulted rage. You think you can buy it?" he hissed. "You think you can sign a paper and buy my brother's life? 1,000 acres? Is that the price you put on him?" "No," she cried, stepping back. It's not like that. It's justice. It's giving back what was taken." "That is not justice. Miss Hale," he roared, and the name Miss Hale was a slap. "That is a rich woman wiping a spot of blood off her ledger. You think my brother's life is worth a piece of your stolen land? It is all blood money. Every last acre, every last rock." He was shouting, his voice echoing in the fine, quiet room. He threw his hat on the floor. "I should have left you in the snow." He turned and stormed out, yanking the study door open. "Eli!" She ran after him, grabbing his arm in the great hall. The servants, who had been hovering, scattered. He wrenched his arm from her grasp. "Get away from me!" He was heading for the massive front door. "You are a fool!" she cried, her own anger rising, hot and sharp. "A proud, stubborn fool! What do you want from me? I cannot bring him back. I cannot change what my father did." "I want nothing from you," he shouted, turning on her. "Not your land, not your money, and not Not this! He made a broken gesture between them, a gesture that encompassed the cabin, the kiss. This house. I am not your pet project. Charlotte, I am not your charity case that you can fix with a piece of paper. Charity. Her pride was stung. A raw wound. You think what happened in that cabin? You think that was charity? I don't know what it was, he yelled, his face tormented. But it's over. I am going back to my mountain. You stay in your castle, with your ghosts and your money. He yanked the heavy oak door open and stormed out into the cold afternoon, leaving her standing alone in the vast, empty hall, shaking. Night fell. A cold, miserable rain began, turning the solid snow to treacherous slush. Eli was in his cabin. It was cold. He had not bothered to build up the fire. It was just embers, same as the night he had confessed about the war. The room was empty. It had never felt this empty before. It was full of her ghost. Her scent was on the blanket on the cot. Her tin cup was by the sink. He was holding that cup, his thumb tracing the rim. He was a fool. He had been right to leave. He had been wrong to kiss her. He had been. He heard a sound outside. Not the wind, not the rain. A horse slogging through the mud. He was on his feet in an instant, his rifle in his hand. He moved to the door, his heart hammering. "Who's there?" he called. The door pushed open, and she fell in. It was Charlotte. She was soaked to the bone. Rainwater streamed from her hair, which was plastered to her face and neck. She was not wearing the silk gown. She was in a simple wool riding skirt and a dark coat, both dripping, heavy with water. She was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. She must have ridden like a madwoman, all the way from the estate, alone, in the dark, in this freezing rain. They just stared at each other. He saw the desperation in her eyes, the wildness. You're mad," he whispered, lowering the rifle. "You'll die of the cold. What are you doing here?" "You," she stammered, her voice shaking, her lips blue. You left your coat." He looked at the peg by the door. His heavy sheepskin coat was hanging right where it always was. He saw the lie. He saw the ride she had taken. He saw the pride she had swallowed. He saw that she had come back. She had come back to the one place she felt safe, or the one place that felt real. "You are a damn fool. Charlotte Hale," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could not name. "And you," she whispered, her whole body trembling, "are a stubborn bastard, Eli Garrett." He closed the distance between them. He didn't kiss her. He simply grabbed her, his hands rough, and pulled her inside, slamming the cabin door against the driving rain. "You're shaking," he said, his voice harsh. He began unbuttoning her frozen coat, his fingers fumbling. "Get by the fire." His hands were on her cold, wet clothes. Hers came up, clinging to his rough wool shirt. The argument, the land, the money. It all dissolved. There was only the sound of the rain lashing the roof, the hiss of the fire as he threw on a log, and the undeniable, desperate pull between them. He stopped, his hands on the buttons of her wet blouse. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. Rain and tears mixed on her cheeks. "Eli," she whispered. This time it was not a desperate collision. It was not an argument. It was a slow, haunted, knowing surrender. He lowered his head and kissed her, his lips tasting the cold rain on hers. He picked her up, her wet clothes dripping on the floor, and carried her to the cot. He pulled the blankets from it, throwing them on the bearskin rug in front of the hearth. In the warmth, he laid her down and began to strip the cold, wet layers from her, then his own. There were no words. There was only the light of the fire, the sound of the storm, and the slow, healing touch of two scarred people finding a moment of warmth. It was not a fire of passion, but a low, steady burn against the cold. It was a quiet, desperate, and profound comfort. It was the release of all the loneliness, all the anger, all the grief. Much later, she lay in his arms, her head on his chest, wrapped in the dry blankets. The rain hammered the roof. The fire crackled, warm and bright. He stroked her damp hair, his rough hand gentle. "You should not have come," he said, his voice a low rumble. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent of smoke and pine. "I know," she whispered. She stayed the night. The rain stopped before dawn, leaving the world in a state of cold, muddy suspension. They rode back to the Hale estate in silence, the gap between their horses wider than it had been on the ride to Whitney Ridge. The night they had shared was a fragile, warm thing, and the harsh light of morning made it seem reckless, impossible. When they arrived, Keller was waiting on the porch. His eyes took in Eli's horse, Charlotte's damp and tangled hair, and the way she refused to look at the foreman. His face, already a map of suspicion, hardened into certainty. He said nothing, but his resentment was a physical presence. Charlotte went inside, and Eli remained in the stable yard, his hands on Gideon's reins, feeling like a trespasser in a foreign country. He knew, with a sinking gut, that he should have left. He should have ridden back to his mountain. News travels in the west on the wind, and the wind in Whitney Ridge was a gossip. It took less than a day. In the saloon, in the mercantile, in the blacksmith's shop, the talk was of nothing else. Charlotte Hale was alive. She had been found by that half-wild loner, Garrett, the one whose family the Hales had run off. And now, Garrett was at the estate. He had been seen coming and going. The Hale buggy had been seen heading up the canyon toward his claim. The rumors began to twist. "He's got some hold on her," a rancher said, spitting tobacco into a cuspidor. "She was gone a week. A woman like that, alone with a man like him." "It's seduction, plain and simple," another agreed. "She's a woman, ain't she? Prone to hysterics. He's playing on her gratitude. He'll have that valley land back before she knows what's hit her. It ain't decent. Her, the owner of the biggest spread in the territory, taken up with him. It's a disgrace to her father's name." Mr. Keller did not start the rumors. He simply cultivated them. He fanned the flames with quiet, grave concern. "I am worried for her," he'd say, his voice low and troubled, to the other powerful ranchers. "She's not herself. She's changed. This Garrett, he has a deep grudge. He's filling her head with poison, turning her against her own." He painted a picture of a master manipulator, a mountain recluse who had preyed on a vulnerable woman to steal the Hale land. He spoke of loyalty, of protecting the old ways, of honoring her father's legacy. He reminded them that if a woman could be so easily swayed, if she could give away 1,000 acres on a whim, what did that mean for their own boundary lines? He pressured them. He drafted a petition, written in stiff, formal language, addressed to the Territorial Board of Stock Growers and the bank in Helena. It declared Charlotte Hale of unsound mind and unfit to manage her father's estate, and called for her removal, suggesting a conservatorship be placed, with Mr. Keller as the logical choice to manage it. He carried it with him, from ranch to ranch, collecting signatures from men who feared change, who distrusted a woman in power, and who were all too happy to believe the worst. Eli knew nothing of this. He was trapped in a strange limbo. He rode back to his cabin, telling himself he was done, but he wasn't. He would find himself checking the stock, only to stop and stare south, toward the Hale ranch, and she would ride up, her face drawn and worried, bringing him a tin of coffee or a new book. They were orbiting each other, unable to land, unable to break away. The night in the cabin had changed everything. It had made them vulnerable. "They're talking, Eli," she said one afternoon, her hands clenched on her reins. "Keller, he's stirring up trouble. He thinks you're using me." "And what do you think?" Eli asked, his voice rough. "I think I don't care what they say. but her eyes were haunted. "Maybe you should," he said, turning away to split wood. "Maybe he's right. Maybe I am poison." "Stop it." "It's true. Nothing good comes from my name or yours. Charlotte, not when they're mixed. It's just blood and smoke." He was right. The proof came 3 nights later. Eli was asleep, a deep, exhausted sleep, when the smell woke him. Acrid, oily smoke. He was out of his cot in an instant. He looked out the window. His barn was a tower of flame. "No!" The word was a raw tear in his throat. His horses. He yanked on his boots, grabbed his rifle, and burst out the door. The heat hit him like a physical blow. The roof of the lean-to was already collapsing, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. He heard the terrified, high-pitched screaming of a horse. He ran. He kicked open the lower corral gate, his heart a cold stone in his chest. "Gideon, Bess!" The mare, Bess, bolted out, her eyes white with terror, her mane singed. She galloped past him into the darkness. But Gideon, his big, steady bay, was trapped. A fallen beam was blocking his stall. Eli didn't hesitate. He covered his face with his arm and plunged into the burning structure. The smoke was a solid, choking thing. He could barely see. "Gideon!" The horse was rearing, kicking at the burning wood, screaming. Eli smashed the stall door with the butt of his rifle, grabbed the horse's halter, and pulled. The beam was too heavy. He put his shoulder under it, the burning wood searing through his shirt, and heaved. The muscles in his back and legs screamed. With a groan of tearing wood, it shifted, just enough. "Now, go!" he roared, slapping the horse's rump. Gideon scrambled over the wood, his flank smoking, and bolted into the night. Eli stumbled out after him, falling to his knees in the muddy snow, coughing, his lungs on fire. He watched, helpless, as the last of the roof caved in, a final, whooshing roar. It was gone, his hay, his tools, the small shelter he had built with his own hands, all of it, gone. He was still on his knees when he heard another horse, galloping hard up the trail. It was Charlotte. She must have seen the flames from the valley. She threw herself from her saddle before the horse even stopped, running to him, her face a pale mask of horror in the firelight. "Eli! Oh, God! Eli! Are you hurt?" She dropped to her knees in front of him, her hands hovering over his back, afraid to touch the burned fabric. He looked at her. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes hollow. He looked at the smoking ruins of his barn. He looked at his hands, blistered and raw. "He warned me," he whispered. "Who? Keller?" "My brother, John. He warned me. He said, 'Eli, this land ain't worth the blood.' I didn't listen." He pushed himself to his feet, his movements stiff, agonizing. "We can rebuild it," she said, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks. "I'll send my men. So they can burn it down again?" He cut her off, his voice flat and dead. "This is what your name brings. Charlotte, this is the compensation. First my brother, now my home." "It's not me. It's Keller. I'll stop him. I will fire him. I swear it." "And then who? The other ranchers? The whole damn valley? It doesn't matter. It's in the blood." He walked past her, toward his cabin. "What are you doing?" she cried, following him. He stalked inside, lit a lamp, and pulled his saddlebags from under the cot. He began to pack, the jerky, the hardtack, his spare ammunition. "Eli, no, don't do this." "I've had enough," he said, his back to her, his voice low and final. "I am leaving. I'm going to Wyoming, or Oregon. Somewhere a man can have a piece of land without having to fight a whole damn army for it." "Leaving?" The word was a knife. You can't just leave me." He stopped packing. He turned to her slowly. "Leave you? You are Charlotte Hale. You have an army. You have a fortress. What could you possibly need from me?" "I need you," she broke down, the words torn from her. The dam of her pride, her composure, it shattered. "You stubborn, blind fool. I love you. Isn't that enough?" The words hung in the small, smoky room. He stared at her, his face a mask of pain. "No," he whispered. "It's not. It's too late. Love don't stop bullets. Charlotte, it doesn't build barns. All it does is give them something else to aim at." He tied his saddlebags shut. He was going. He was really going. She was losing him. The one person who had seen her. Not the name, not the money. The one person who had been real. And it was all because of a lie. A lie she had told, and a lie she was still telling. "It was me," she whispered. He stopped, his hand on his rifle. "What?" "The land," she said, her voice trembling, a new, terrible calm settling over her. "The expansion. My father—" She took a shaking breath. "My father was ill for years before he died. He was weak. I was running the ranch. I had been running it since I was 20. Eli did not move. He was a statue carved of shadow. "It was me," she repeated, the confession tearing her apart. "I ordered the expansion. I signed the papers. I wanted the water. I thought it was just business. Lines on a map. I thought I was proving I was as strong as he was. As any man." She looked up, her eyes pleading with him to understand, to see the ignorant, arrogant girl she had been. "Silas, my foreman then. He warned me. He told me about you, about your brother. He said you were good men, and I told him to secure the boundary. That was the word I used. Secure. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't understand the cost. I didn't know it meant him, John." She was sobbing now, a raw, ugly sound. "Your brother died because of me. Eli, not my father. Me, I killed him. It was me." The silence that followed was absolute. It was worse than the fire, worse than the screaming horse. Eli turned, very slowly. His face, she would never forget his face. It was not anger, it was not hatred. It was a kind of profound, empty devastation. The man he thought he knew, the woman he thought he had loved, had just turned to dust in his hands. The entire foundation of their fragile world had been a lie. He had kissed his brother's murderer. He had held her. He had protected her. He looked at her, and his eyes were the eyes of a stranger. They were dead. "Eli!" she choked, reaching for him. He recoiled as if she were a snake. His hand came up, not to strike her, but to ward her off. "Get away from me," he whispered. The words were full of a cold, final loathing. He picked up his rifle and his saddlebags. He walked past her, his shoulder brushing hers, and he did not look back. She heard the cabin door open. She heard him whistle, a long, low call. She heard Gideon's answering nicker from the darkness. Then the sound of hoofbeats, moving fast, moving south, away. He was gone. Charlotte fell to her knees on the cabin floor. She stayed there for a long time, the smell of smoke in her hair, the cold of the empty room seeping into her bones. Despair was a cold, quiet place. But after the despair came the rage, a pure, cold rage. She rode back to the Hale Ranch as the sun was rising. She did not stop to bathe or change. She walked into the great hall, her boots muddy, her face streaked with soot and tears, her clothes smelling of smoke. Keller was in the dining room, drinking coffee. He stood when he saw her, a flicker of alarm in his eyes. "Miss Hale, what happened?" "You're fired, Keller," she said, her voice flat. He blinked. "What?" "You are fired. You have 1 hour to pack your things and get off my land. If I see you on Hale property again, I will have you shot for trespassing." "Now, Miss Charlotte," he began, his voice placating. "You're upset. That business with Garrett's barn is a shame, but—" "It was you," she said. It was not a question. His face hardened. You can't prove that, and you can't fire me. Your father— My father is dead. This is my ranch, and these are my orders. She pulled the petition from his coat pocket, where it was sticking out. She had seen him with it. This is betrayal. I was protecting the ranch, he blustered, his face turning red. Protecting it from him, from you. You're giving it away. You're weak. Your father would be ashamed. Get out, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Get out before I get a rifle. He stared at her, saw the stranger in her eyes, and knew he had lost. He stormed out. She went to her study. She did not sleep. She began to write. She sent riders to the small, scattered claims that had been hurt by her expansion. She sent for the widow of Silas, her old foreman. She sent for the families of the other men who had died in her business. By noon, they were gathered in her great hall, confused and wary. She stood before them, her clothes still the ones from the fire. My name is Charlotte Hale, she said, her voice clear and carrying. For 10 years, this ranch, under my direction, has taken your land, your water, and your families. Today, that stops. She announced she was firing Keller. She announced she was returning the deed to the Garrett Valley claim, in full. And then, she looked at the widows. I cannot bring back your husbands, but I can offer you work. Good work. I am hiring all of you. Mrs. Davies, you will manage the new kitchens. Mrs. Pike, you will run the household accounts. Your sons, those of you with sons old enough, will be given positions. Not as range hands, as apprentices, to the blacksmith, to the bookkeepers, to the head stablemen. You will be paid a full wage. You will have housing. This ranch will provide for the families it broke. The room was silent. Her board of advisors, the old men from the bank in Helena, were furious. They sent a telegram. This is madness. It is financial suicide. We will stop you. She sent one back. Try. I will dissolve the board and sell the assets to an Eastern syndicate. Your choice. They fell silent. She had done it. She had torn down her father's legacy and begun to build her own. But the victory was hollow. The great hall was empty. The cabin on the mountain was empty. He was gone. That evening, alone, she saddled her horse. She rode, not to the mountain, but to the place he had lived. She rode to the ruins of his barn. The smell of ash was thick in the air. She dismounted and walked to the back of the cabin, to the small, lone grave under the pine. John Garrett, 1861 to 1880 gone. She stood there for a long time, the cold wind pulling at her hair. Then, she reached for the locket around her neck, the one with James, her brother, inside, the symbol of her own old grief. She unfastened the chain. With a shaking hand, she laid it over the rough carved wood of the grave marker. She laid her own loss at the feet of the loss she had caused. I am so sorry, she whispered, not to Eli, not to John, but to the wind. It was a vow, a promise to be better. She turned to go. The sun had set, and the mountains were sinking into a deep, purple gloom. A gunshot echoed through the valley. The sound was sharp, close. A bullet tore through the sleeve of her coat, ripping the fabric, stinging her arm like a hot poker. Her horse screamed and reared. She fell, hard, as a second shot rang out. This one hit her. A sharp, searing pain exploded in her shoulder, and the world went black. Eli Garrett rode for 2 days, his heart a cold, dead stone in his chest. He was running. He was not running to Wyoming. He was running from a ghost, from a confession that had ripped the world from under his feet. It was me. I killed him. The words echoed with every agonizing hoofbeat of his horse. Gideon. He was 100 miles south, on the edge of the Wyoming line, in a foul little saloon in a town that was little more than a muddy street. He was drinking whiskey, the raw alcohol doing nothing to burn away the cold that had settled in his soul. He had not slept. He had just ridden. pushing himself and his horse until they were both hollowed out. Empty. Two men at the bar were talking, their voices low, but carrying in the quiet, desperate room. "Heard it from a fella on the telegraph wire," one said. "Up in Whitney Ridge. That rich Hale woman. The one who went missing." Eli's hand tightened on his glass. He kept his back to them. "What about her?" the other asked. "Got herself shot, ambushed. Some say it was her own foreman, fella named Keller, that she fired. Others say, well, it's a mess." Eli's blood went thick and slow. "They say she was found up at some loner's cabin. Place was burned. They figure Keller burned the barn, and then lay in wait for her." Eli stood up. The stool scraped loudly on the floor. The saloon went quiet. He walked to the bar, his movements stiff. The men looked at him, at his soot-stained coat, his blistered hands, his dead eyes. "Where?" Eli's voice was a rasp. "Where what, friend?" "Where was she shot?" Up on some ridge. A place. Garrett's claim. I think they said, why?" Eli did not answer. He threw his last coins on the bar, walked out into the freezing, miserable sleet, and hauled himself onto his exhausted horse. He had pushed Gideon to the breaking point. He did not care. He turned the horse's head north, back into the mud and the ice, and he kicked him into a run. The ride back was a nightmare. It was not a heroic dash. It was a punishing, brutal act of will. The sleet turned to a driving, freezing rain. The ground was a treacherous bog. Gideon, the horse he had saved from the fire, was failing. His breath came in ragged, painful bursts. Eli did not stop. He did not rest. He rode the horse into the ground, and when Gideon finally staggered and fell, his leg broken, 20 miles south of Whitney Ridge, Eli did not weep. He pulled his rifle from the scabbard, put a merciful bullet in the horse's head, and he began to walk. He walked all night, his boots sucking in the mud, the freezing rain soaking him to the bone. He was not fueled by love. He was fueled by a terrible, raw fear. He had left her. He had walked away, and his leaving had put the bullet in her. The ambush had been for him, or for her, or for both of them. It did not matter. He had left her alone to face the consequences of his rage. He reached the Hale estate at dawn, a walking ghost of mud and ice. The place was transformed. The gates were closed. There were men on the walls. Not ranch hands, but men with rifles. He saw the faces, the sons of the widows, the men she had hired. They were guarding her. "Hold there!" one of them yelled, leveling his rifle. "That's Garrett!" Eli did not stop. He walked toward the main door, his body a single, straight line of purpose. "Stop, or we'll shoot!" "She's alive," Eli said, his voice raw. It was not a question. "You're not welcome here. Garrett, you're the one who brought this. Keller—" "Get out of my way," Eli said, and he pushed the young guard aside as if he were a child. He shoved the massive front door open and stumbled into the great hall. It was quiet. The house felt like a tomb. A woman he recognized, the widow of Silas, the one she had called Mrs. Davies, was standing by the stairs, her face pale and stained with tears. "He's here, ma'am," she called up, her voice trembling, looking at Eli with a mix of fear and pity. Eli took the stairs, his muddy boots staining the fine carpet. He took them two at a time. He knew where her room was. He had dreamed of it, of her, in her fine house. He pushed the door open. A doctor was packing his bag. A maid was changing a bloody basin of water, and Charlotte was in the bed. She was so pale she looked like a wax doll. Her hair was spread out on the white pillow. Her arm was heavily bandaged, her shoulder a mass of white linen, and she was breathing, shallow, but breathing. She was alive. He stopped in the doorway, the mud and sleet dripping from him, forming a puddle on the floor. Her eyes fluttered open. They were cloudy with pain and laudanum. She saw him. A small, confused frown touched her brow. "Eli," she whispered. Her voice was a thread. The doctor and the maid slipped out, closing the door behind them. They were alone. He walked to the bed, his hat in his hand. He did not know what to say. The confession, the fire, the ride, it all churned in his gut. You came back," she whispered. He nodded. He could not speak. "Why?" she asked, her eyes searching his. I told you. It was me." He knelt by the bed, his knees cracking. He was so tired he could barely hold his own head up. He looked at her, at the woman who had ruined his life, and the woman who had saved it, the woman who had lied, and the woman who had, in the end, told the most terrible truth of all. "I didn't want you to die," he said, his voice rough, breaking. "Not before I said I still love you." A single, perfect tear welled in the corner of her eye and tracked slowly into her hair. She tried to lift her good hand. He took it. It was cold. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For John." "I know," he said. He squeezed her hand. "I know." It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was something more raw and more real. It was acceptance. He saw all of her. The arrogant girl who had signed the order, the terrified woman in the snow, the brave leader who had fired a dangerous man, and the lover who had ridden through the rain, and he loved all of it. He bent his head, his face raw from the wind and the cold, and he kissed her forehead. He did not let go of her hand. He pulled a chair to the bedside, sat down, and laid his head on the mattress beside her. He stayed there through the day, and he held her hand through the long, dark night. Charlotte recovered slowly. The bullet had been deep, shattering part of her collarbone. The winter was hard, and her healing was slow. Eli stayed. He was an awkward shadow in the great, fine house. He slept in a guest room, but he spent his days in her study, or by her bed. He read to her, not from the book about the pond, but from the newspapers, reading her the cattle prices, the news from Helena. The widows and the new workers watched him. They saw the way he tended to her, the way his presence, quiet and solid, seemed to give her strength. The suspicion in their eyes faded, replaced by a grudging and then a total respect. In town, the petition was found in Keller's abandoned office. He had fled the territory, a warrant out for his arrest for attempted murder. The men who had signed the paper were shamed. They came to the Hale Ranch, hats in hand, not to see Charlotte, but to talk to Eli. They offered to help him rebuild his barn. He accepted. The people of Whitney Ridge, the same people who had gossiped, now spoke her name with a new tone. Mrs. Hale. She was not the weak, flighty woman Keller had painted. She was proud, yes, but she was fair. She had faced down her father's past. She had faced down a gunman, and she was rebuilding her world, and theirs, on a foundation of honesty. The rumors died, and the respect grew. As the snows began their final retreat, and the first green of spring pushed through the mud, she was strong enough to ride. Eli saddled her horse himself. They did not ride into town. They rode up into the high country. They rode past the frozen, swollen streams, their ice breaking, the water running fast and clear beneath. They rode over the wind-blasted hills, where the new grass was a pale, hopeful green. They rode through the forests they had once crossed alone, and they were silent, relearning the land together. He moved his things into the Hale estate. It was a practical matter. The ranch needed a man, and she needed him. He took a room, not as a guest, but as a partner. He was stiff in the high-backed chairs, and he hated the fancy dinners. But he stayed. But some days, often in the late afternoon, he would saddle Gideon's replacement, a tough buckskin, and ride up to his old claim. He had rebuilt the barn, with the help of the other ranchers. The cabin was still there, solid and quiet. And more often than not, Charlotte would join him. She would ride up alone, wearing a simple riding skirt and a plain wool shirt. No servants, no fine clothes. She would sit with him on the cabin porch, and they would watch the sun go down, the high valley turning shades of purple and gold. They spoke little, but it was a comfortable silence. One bright spring morning, the air smelling of pine and damp earth, they rode up together. Eli was carrying something. They dismounted at the cabin, but they did not go inside. They walked to the back, to the small grave under the tall pine. The snow was gone, and early. Tough wildflowers, purple lupine and yellow bells, were pushing up through the pine needles. Charlotte knelt, her hands dirty. She placed the small bunch of wildflowers she had picked by the creek at the base of the marker. The locket, her locket, was still there, tarnished from the winter, but solid. Eli stood beside her, his hat in his hands. He looked at the grave, at the name of the brother he had lost, at the flowers from the woman who had, in her own way, been lost, too. He felt the last of the ice in his heart finally, truly, break and melt away. He knelt beside her. She looked at him, her green eyes clear, no shadows left in them. Eli reached out and took her hand. His rough, calloused fingers closed over her smaller, stronger ones. He did not say a word. He just held on. The camera of the story pans out, lifting away from the two kneeling figures, rising above the small, rebuilt cabin, sweeping over the vast, wide skies of Montana, where the last of the snow was melting on the highest peaks, and the long, cold winter was finally, truly, over. Two scarred hearts, finally resting where the cold could not reach. Thank you for listening to our story around the campfire, and we encourage you to comment with where you're listening from to connect with fellow travelers. Subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel, and share your thoughts on Eli and Charlotte's journey.